Returning to the Sirah, Ishak replays Muhammad's fantasy in front of Nimrod, rather than in the Hall of Idols. After daring the gods to talk, Abraham is questioned by a king who died 700 years earlier.
Tabari: have you seen this Allah whom you worship, and whose worship you call others? Who is he? Abraham replied, My Lord, who gives life and causes death.
The question was too tough, so he did the old political sidestep.
Nimrod said, I give life and cause death.
They chatted about this for a while, and then Abraham said,
Allah causes the sun to rise in the east, so can you make it rise in the west?
Good thing he didn't mention the chariot thing. The angelic handholds are the garment of luminosity.
Knowing that it was as Abraham said, Nimrod was ashamed. He gave no answer. He knew that he was not able to do that. Allah said, Thus was the unbeliever abashed. That is to say, the proof was against him.
Now that Muslims know that the sun does not follow Allah's commands, shouldn't they be ashamed? Isn't the proof clearly against them?
Tabari: they pushed Abraham into the furnace. Then the heavens and the earth and all the creatures therein, except humans and jinn, shouted to Allah, Our Lord, Abraham, the only one on earth who worships you, is being burned in the fire for your sake. Permit us to help him.
Everybody talks to Allah except humans and demons. Who might they be?
Allah answered, I am his friend. I will protect him. O fire, be coolness and peace for Abraham.
So following this fireside chat, we read,
Imprison him in a building and cast him into hell. Abraham raised his head
and contradicted most of what we have read thus far.
You are alone in heaven, and I am alone on earth. Had Allah not followed the command for coolness and peace, Abraham would have frozen to death. Tabari: Abraham and Lot set out for Syria. On the way, Abraham met Sarah, who was the daughter of the king of Haran.
Actually, Abram left Ur for Haran, traveling along the banks of the Euphrates River. He was accompanied by his father Terah, his wife and half-sister Sarai, and his nephew Lot.
She had criticized her people about their religion, so he married her, since he would be able to have a believing wife without having to convert her.
This verse implies one becomes a Muslim by criticizing a religion.
Then Abraham went forth a fugitive for the sake of his Lord, to practice his religion and worship safely.
Why would Abe fear for his safety after having been saved from the fire? And why, if he was God's messenger, did he leave town? Shouldn't he have stayed and tried to save the Babylonians? No. Recasting Abraham was more important. Muhammad fled Mecca as a fugitive. He ran to Yathrib, today's Medina, because some pagans promised to protect him. The revisionist Abraham makes the cowardly Muhammad appear more godly.
He settled in Haran. Then he left as a fugitive and traveled to Egypt, which was under the rule of one of the earliest pharaohs.
Well, not exactly. The first Egyptian ruler was probably the Scorpion King. He ruled more than 500 years before Abraham's arrival.
Sarah was one of the best humans ever. She would not disobey Abraham in any way.
That was Muhammad's idea of a perfect woman. From Bukhari's Book of Belief.
The prophet said, I was shown the hell fire, and the majority of its dwellers were women who are disbelievers or ungrateful. When asked what they were ungrateful for, the prophet answered, all the favors done for them by their husbands.
Next we find Muhammad Islamicized Abraham's encounter with Pharaoh. The only germane insight into this affair is Pharaoh's gift of Hagar, a Coptic slave girl. Flunking history, the Allah-Muhammad duo didn't know that the Copts were centuries away from arriving on the international scene. Leaving Pharaoh, Abraham tells Sarah,
You are my sister in Allah, for in all this land there are no Muslims except ourselves.
So what happened to all of those scrolls and to the nations who were worshipping around Allah's house? Some of what follows includes,
Hagar was of good appearance, and Sarah gave her to Abraham, saying, Take her, you may take pleasure in Hagar, for I have permitted it. The messenger said, When you conquer Egypt, treat its people well. They're kin and deserve protection. Abraham left Egypt for Syria, for he was afraid of the Egyptian king and anxious about his evil ways. He settled in Beersheba in the land of Palestine, which is the desert of Syria.
Well, most of this comes out of the Bible. It is flavored with standard Muslim embellishments. One such addition is revealing. There was no Palestine during Abraham's life. The word was first composed by the Romans 2,100 years after Abraham died. The patriarch actually returned to Canaan, named after his great-great-uncle. Folks with King James Bibles may think Isaiah invented the name, but it's an errant translation. Isaiah 14:29 uses Pelesheth, which means rolling in dust.
Tabari. Abraham dug a well in Beersheba and said, "Drink from it, and do not let a menstruating woman dip water from it."
Muhammad, a sexual libertine, if there ever was one, hated menstruation with a passion. As you know, he said that the reason Allah's stone turned from white to black was, it was fingered by menstruating women. As sick as that sounds, this next hadith is used by Muslims to justify brutalizing their daughters.
Tabari. Sarah swore to cut something off of Hagar. "I shall cut off her nose. I shall cut off her ear. But no, that would deform her. I will circumcise her instead." So she did that, and Hagar took a piece of cloth to wipe the blood away. For that reason, women have been circumcised, and have taken pieces of cloth down to today. A menstruating woman came and dipped water from the well, whereupon the water dried up.
Well, I do not know the connection. The next paragraph begins.
When Allah wished to destroy Lot's people, he sent his messengers to Abraham, commanding him to leave their community.
Weren't we just told the only two Muslims were Abe and Sarah? And Abraham was in Beersheba, not Sodom. So why ask him to leave?
They had done vile deeds which no one in the two worlds had done before, disbelieving their prophets and rejecting the good counsel which Lot brought them from their Lord. The messengers were ordered to visit Abraham and give him and Sarah good tidings of the coming of Isaac, and also of Jacob, who was to come after him.
For Islam to have any hope of being credible, the good news had to be of Ishmael, not Isaac. Jacob wasn't Sarah's kid, and neither Jacob nor Isaac are of any value to Islam. At this point, the Muslim mathematicians jumped into the fray.
Tabari. Abraham was 16 when he was thrown into the fire, and Isaac was 7 when he was sacrificed, while Sarah was 90 when she bore him. The place of his sacrifice was about 2 miles from Beit Ilah. When Sarah learned what Allah had wanted with Isaac, she fell ill for 2 days and died on the 3rd. Sarah was 127 when she died.
Muslim math is as confused as Muslim science. 127 minus 90 equals 7. So much for Arabic numerals. Now we get to the important part.
Tabari. After Ishmael and Isaac were born, Allah commanded Abraham to build a house for him, in which he would be worshipped and his name mentioned.
This must be the house that Allah didn't build in heaven, that Adam didn't build, that Seth didn't build, that Noah didn't circumnavigate after Allah didn't raise it above the flood.
Abraham did not know exactly where he was expected to build it, since Allah had not made this clear.
Nor anything else.
And he felt uneasy in the matter. Some scholars say that Allah sent the Shekinah to him.
It's a rip-off of the Hebrew Shekinah, the presence of Yahweh.
To show him where to build the house. The Shekinah went with Abraham, who was accompanied by his wife Hagar.
Hagar was never Abraham's wife, and Muslims know it.
And his son Ishmael, who was a small boy.
The tradition continues.
A man came to Ali bin Talib,
Muhammad's adopted son, his son-in-law, future caliph,
and said, "Will you tell me about the house?" He replied, "It was the first built with the blessing of the standing place of Abraham, and whoever enters it will be safe. If you wish, I will tell you how it was built." Allah said to Abraham, "Build me a house on earth." Abraham felt uneasy, so he sent the Shekinah. The Shekinah is a gale-forced wind with 2 heads, and one head followed the other until they reached Mecca and coiled up at the sight of the house, the way a snake coils.